There is one more way to kill a man, but it is as intricate and precise as a well-played game of chess.
So, this story took a bit to get my mind around, a whole day, in fact. Amazon now has creative control over the James Bond franchise. Michael G. Wilson and Barbara Broccoli will remain co-owners of Bond but are stepping back to focus on other projects. Now, truth be told, I'm not particularly too fond of the recent James Bond films. I thought that Casino Royale and Skyfall are entertaining films. I know a lot of people love Casino Royale and consider it the greatest Bond film of all time, but I don't really hold that sentiment. To me, GoldenEye is my favorite Bond film of all time. And that was under the control of Michael G. Wilson and Barbara Broccoli. However, that was in the 90s, and then in the 2000s, they tried to do this shared sort of continuity with the Daniel Craig era. Now, say what you will about the Daniel Craig movies, but at least they did feel like one continuous story, or at least they tried to make it feel like that. That being said, No Time to Die ended in a controversial way, shall we say, and it just sort of went into a direction that a lot of fans didn't like, James Bond dying, and I will say that I'm not a big fan of it. However, after that, James Bond was in a bit of a limbo. We didn't know who was going to be the next Bond. We didn't know what Barbara and Michael's goals were or ideas were for the next Bond. Where were they going to take it? And as of now, it's confirmed that Amazon is, well, having control over James Bond, and I have some mixed feelings on it. And Jeff Bezos just basically posted who does he want us to pick James Bond, and it basically is confirmed that James Bond is now in the hands of Jeff Bezos. Lovely. Anyway, let's look at the deadline article, shall we? Amazon MGM Studios shell out an extra $1 billion plus to take control of James Bond. What's next for the franchise? Fucking $1 billion. God damn. Anyway, exclusive. It's taken around $1 billion to have 007 stewards Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson cede creative oversight of their family's storied James Bond franchise to Amazon MGM Studios, source tells us. That, I'm gonna be honest, like, say what you will about Barbara and Michael, but they were there from the 90s. They've been there before that with the original Cubby Broccoli, who helped maintain the franchise from the beginning. And to see it hand over into a conglomerate, I'm very hesitant of it. Amazon originally overpaid on its purchase of MGM in a deal orchestrated by then MGM board chair Kevin Ulrich valued between $3.5 billion to $4 billion. The legendary motion picture studios was absorbed by the streamer for $8.5 billion. The hefty sum propped up by the potential access of the 007 franchise. However, Amazon couldn't freely develop Bond with Barbara and Wilson in the mix. Hence, it took another $1 billion to ensure that they could fully steer and exploit the Ian Fleming IP. And I feel like exploit is a very good word as to what they're going to do with the franchise. Details on what makes up the new $1 billion deal is unknown at the time, and whether it includes Amazon stock options, the deal of Amazon MGM to take full creative command of Bond hasn't closed yet. We're told while Amazon MGM Studios declined comments for this story, the expectation for sources in that there will be an element of shared economy in the movies going forward. Yeah, sure, movies going forward. There's gonna be like one movie every couple of years, but then there's gonna be like a bunch of spin-offs. It's like, oh, here's a spin-off of a Bond girl that didn't really need it. Lovely. That's great. Diluting the brand is gonna be what Amazon is gonna do, and it's gonna suck, let me tell you. All of this was a necessary step to propel Bond into the immediate future. Amazon has spent an immense amount of money on MGM, and it had to be deliberate when it comes to pushing along the 007 IP. Amazon is a volume-driven company, and this morning's announcement of the deal put the pedal to the metal. Also, Amazon's control of Bond comes at a time when there is no such thing as a coincidence. As Deadline first told you, the streamer is looking to have an international theatrical distribution arm fully operational by sometime in 2026. Yeah, listen, when it comes to Amazon, like, I think they could go... they're going to exploit it, but I hope they don't. I hope that James Bond is every couple of years, there's an event where they can gear up for their next James Bond film. I feel like that's what they need. But instead, what's going to happen is I feel like there's going to be a TV show on James Bond, the in-between years. James Bond. Oh, this is a Bond girl spin-off, or James Bond. There is another agent that is working with James Bond, or it leads up to James Bond showing up at the end, like he's Tony Stark or whatever. And I don't want that. I want James Bond to be just James Bond in his own movie, the hero. Those close to Barbara Broccoli and Wilson's camp are gobsmacked that Barbara caved to the streamer. She's a fighter, says one source, but she got tired of fighting. Another acknowledges it had to be an emotional decision for Broccoli. Also, with Wilson ready to retire, Broccoli wasn't going to go at it alone. Yeah, that is true. I mean, Cubby Broccoli, who basically had to take over the James Bond franchise from The Spy Who Loved Me up until, I would say, GoldenEye, maybe License to Kill. He had to deal with just by himself after Harry Saltzman had to sell off his shares. And, you know, he was a very strong man considering how he was able to continue the James Bond legacy right up until his kids took over. And I feel that is a lot of respect for him. And I totally get that Barbara wants to relinquish it. Considering that, well, Michael G. Wilson and Barbara have been in it together since GoldenEye. Broccoli's era surrounded Amazon's desire to expand the James Bond franchise into its own universe akin to Marvel or Star Wars. Fuck, there, right there. Oh, god damn it. Broccoli and Wilson, children of the legendary 007 producer Albert R. Broccoli, and always held the line on quality control when it comes to The British Spy, keeping the series as a standalone big screen brand. With today's news, Amazon can now proceed in extending the life of Bond. In the past, filmmakers including Quentin Tarantino and Christopher Nolan have expressed an interest in putting their stamp on Bond. Both, however, required complete creative control, which wasn't possible under the regime of Broccoli and Wilson. Now, with the producers on their side, Amazon can move forward to attract top-tier directors. See, here's the thing. Now, I really like Quentin Tarantino and Christopher Nolan. I think they're phenomenal directors, and I think they could make great James Bond films. But the reason that Wilson and Broccoli and Barbara made sure that, well, they had creative control over it and they had to stick to a guideline is because there was a James Bond formula. Now, granted, people complain about No Time to Die and all that, but essentially that Barbara Broccoli did do that, considering how she did it because Daniel Craig wanted to kill off Bond. Like, there's no surprise there. Daniel Craig really just wanted to end his run as James Bond. And I feel as though that it sort of is poetic that James Bond gets blown up, as it's now brought up by the biggest streamer outside of Netflix. Also available to come to life is the New Deal finally are a slew of Bond villains and women in their own series or features. Fuck! The last time an attempt was made was the spin-off franchise was in 2003 with a standalone movie about the spy's girlfriend Jinx, played by Halle Berry in Die Another Day. Bond scribes Neil Purvis and Rob Wade were attached to pen that, with Stephen Frears circling, but Broccoli and Wilson put a kibosh to the idea due to creative differences. And here's the thing, the creative differences was Casino Royale. They were able to purchase the rights to Casino Royale. And essentially, instead of making a Jinx spin-off, which they were going to do, they said, screw all that, let's just reboot from the start. And I think that was a great idea, considering how Die Another Day, at that point, had been the lowest rated Bond film for a while. A lot of fans still consider it one of the worst films to be made in the franchise. I really enjoy it. That being said, it's not the best. It is very campy, over the top. Overall, it's a fun time, but it is very stupid. But the fact that there were plans for a spin-off even before Die Another Day. Apparently there was going to be a spin-off of Wei Lin from Tomorrow Never Dies, but instead of that, they decided to make The World Is Not Enough and other James Bond movies, because that's what you just need. You just need James frickin' Bond. You don't need to expand the universe to include other Bond girls or other villains to have their own series or movies as to why they are what they are. We can just base it off their one movie. The hard work now begins immediately in choosing the right executive to steer Bond in Kevin Feige fashion at Amazon MGM Studios. Meanwhile, cynicism abounds around town. Yeah, I don't... See, I don't want that. I get that they want an executive to steer Bond in the right way. And I feel as though that you need someone who respects James Bond and knows what they want to do with it. But it's just the fact that they're looking for a Kevin Feige fashion producer is what makes me scared, because Kevin Feige, he essentially has the job of running this entire universe. This guy should be simple in saying, hey, we're just doing one movie at a time, and putting his foot down. One senior British film executive lamented, without Barbara's careful supervision, Bond just becomes Jack Reacher in some TV show. Agreed. That's totally it. That's what my concern is for James Bond. One thing about Amazon versus traditional motion picture studios, it will spend and market to the high heavens and make a movie for a streamer. They don't have any stakes. The danger per one well-paced studio player, watch this space, it's going to end up like The Gorge. Now there are execs already on hand at Amazon MGM Studios to prevent such blunders, including Scott Stuber, who has a history of shepherding tentpoles at Universal, and the head of UA Bond's Tradition home studio. There's also Amazon's top film executive, Country Valenti, who knows what it takes to create and launch a global franchise, having been behind such films as Barbie, Mad Max Fury Road, and the Harry Potter spin-off movies, Fantastic Beasts, at Warner Brothers. Now, did you really have to include the Fantastic Beasts and Barbie? I mean, I get it. They made a fair amount of money, but at the same time, Barbie, well received by women, but it was a very controversial film. Harry Potter, the Fantastic Beasts movies, I don't remember a lot of people really liking it. But Mad Max Fury Road, I know a lot of people really enjoyed that film. Also key, of course, is finding a new actor to play Bond, particularly someone who is young enough, for much like the Bonds before him, e.g. Sean Connery, Roger Moore, Pierce Brosnan, and Daniel Craig. They'll need to wear the tuxedo for at least a decade or more. They would have just kept on fighting, says one source about the rift between Broccoli and Wilson and Amazon. Now, a new Bond movie can be delivered to a new generation much sooner. Here's the thing though. I really didn't like the wait that we've had between the Daniel Craig era to this new era, but the fact that we're going to be introducing a new Bond movie to a new generation is very, very concerning, as I am not really too keen on the fact that, well, Amazon is now a part of... as Amazon has just taken over my favorite franchise, and it's just... I'm very concerned about that. So back to what Jeff Bezos tweeted, who'd you pick as the next James Bond? And a lot of people say Henry Cavill. There are some other options, obviously, but Henry Cavill is it. Idris Elba, listen, I like Idris Elba, but I feel as though that he kind of wouldn't suit James Bond, and that's just me. With Henry Cavill, I saw his audition, and I thought it was decent. You know, it wasn't bad, but he was not bad in the audition process. But what I did see from The Man from U.N.C.L.E. was basically him playing an American James Bond. And I thought he was fantastic in that. He was great. He basically played an American James Bond. And I loved it. He was fantastic. But yeah, a lot of actors... Tom Cruise, jeez. But a lot of actors considered, but for the most part, Aaron Taylor-Johnson and Henry Cavill... Ooh, Tom Hardy is not bad. But yeah, a lot of people considered, but... a lot of people want Henry Cavill, and I totally get that, because Henry Cavill was there from 2006, 2005 or so, when the auditions came in, and it was down between him and Daniel Craig. And I would really like to see the Daniel Craig version of it, because I can totally understand why they wanted to go with Henry Cavill, because... with that audition, if you watched it, it was very much I understood what they wanted. A couple of the other actors did manage to pull off that Brosnan sort of lightheartedness, but when it came to Henry Cavill, he went in a much more serious route, and I feel as though that's what I can see what the director wanted when it came to Henry Cavill. But yes... Amazon has creative control over my favorite franchise, and I'm a bit worried about it. Now, that being said, perhaps Amazon doesn't do a Disney, and they do an amazing job with James Bond. And I hope that's the case, because if they're able to consider that James Bond is a one-movie guy, then I'm sure that it will do well. Sure, you can have maybe one or two spin-offs if you're really that desperate, but I feel as though the one movie James Bond in the thing is enough for me. But it is Amazon. You know, they have screwed up a ton of franchises that a lot of people really enjoy, and I'm worried that they will do a Disney and ruin it like Star Wars. Star Wars had a lot of breaks in between their movies, and granted, there has been a considerable break from the last Star Wars movie up until now, but since then, they've had Disney Plus with a bunch of streaming shows that have unfortunately declined, and I don't want James Bond to be like that. I don't want there to be a 5-movie or a 3-movie trilogy, and then there's a break, and it's all a bunch of spin-off shows on freaking Amazon. I don't want them to replace James Bond with this other spin-off James Bond guy who sucks. And then he's the center of this new James Bond universe. I don't want that. But those are my thoughts on Amazon taking over James Bond. Now, Amazon can do the right thing, and they can actually pick Henry Cavill, who knows the franchise, and pick someone who knows the franchise to steer the James Bond franchise. Maybe adapt some of the previous Bond novels, or maybe just take elements from those movies and put it into the actual movies in this new era. But you know, there is something to be said that, at least with Michael and Barbara, they always kept going back to Ian Fleming. They went back to those original texts, those original ideas that made James Bond great. And I feel as though with Amazon, with how they deal with their beloved and iconic franchises, they're going to completely ignore Ian Fleming. And that is my concern. They may very well ignore Ian Fleming and all of the Bond films beforehand, and James Bond is essentially just any other schlock. And I don't want that. But those are my thoughts on James Bond. Once again, I have a lot of opinions on this, and I feel like Amazon, if they do treat James Bond with respect, it will be fine. But if they go down that, they try and chase tails with Disney's Marvel and Star Wars and all of that, James Bond is done. And this may be very well the end. And James Bond may not die another day. And that's a shame. But anyway, I just want to say to all of you, thank you all for watching and keeping up with this news video. This one's going to be on the main channel because, well, James Bond is dear to my heart. And this one is too big for a smaller channel of mine. Anyway, I just wanted to say to everyone who watched it, thank you all, take care, and have a good one.
How did it happen? I think they were on their way to a funeral.